When the real estate mogul died, his trophy wife inherited the penthouse, the portfolio, and the private jet. His two stepchildren divided $43 million in trust funds without breaking a sweat. His only biological daughter, the one he hadn't spoken to in 7 years, received a broken pocket watch that hadn't kept time since 1987. But that watch was the only thing in the room worth keeping. The offices of Caldwell, Marsh & Pruitt occupied the entire 31st floor of a glass tower in downtown Chicago, and on a gray Tuesday morning in late October, the building's heating system was working overtime against a wind that had been tearing off Lake Michigan since before dawn. Willa Bancroft, 34 years old, sat in the farthest chair from the head of the conference table and tried very hard not to look at the woman sitting directly across from her. Constance Bancroft wore a charcoal Valentino dress and a strand of pearls that Willa recognized. Because her mother had owned an identical one before Constance had somehow acquired it in the divorce settlement, 3 years after her mother's funeral. Constance was 51 and looked 40, the result of 2 decades of careful maintenance and a surgeon in Scottsdale she visited every spring. She did not look at Willa. She looked at the attorney. Edmund Hartley, 67, senior partner, Graham Bancroft's legal counsel for the past 31 years, sat at the head of the table with a folder thick enough to stop a bullet. His face was like old Riverstone, weathered, entirely unreadable. To Constance's left sat Declan Marsh, her son from a first marriage, 38, the kind of man who wore a signet ring without irony. To her right was Fiona, Declan's younger sister by 2 years, who had recently launched a lifestyle brand with 11,000 Instagram followers and 0 revenue. Both had taken their stepfather's last name when Constance married Graham 12 years ago. Willa had always found that particular detail offensive. Willa herself was wearing a dark green cardigan she'd had since graduate school, and a pair of clean slacks she'd ironed that morning in her studio apartment in Wicker Park. She taught 4th grade at a public school on the north side. She drove a 2014 Honda Civic with a cracked dashboard. She had come to this meeting with a travel mug of gas station coffee and absolutely no expectations. Her father, Graham Allen Bancroft, had been the founder and chairman of Bancroft Property Group, a commercial real estate empire with holdings across 11 states valued at approximately $3 billion. He had been 69 years old, legendarily private, and in the 7 years since Willa had stopped returning his calls, she had watched him age from a distance through photographs in business journals. He had looked diminished in the last few years, smaller. She had told herself it wasn't her problem. Now he was gone, and Edmund Hartley was clearing his throat, and it was time for the accounting. The numbers were staggering. Constance received the family's primary residence, a lakefront estate in Winnetka worth $8 million, along with a controlling interest in the property group's residential division, and a cash bequest of $12 million. She received it all with the stillness of someone who had been rehearsing this moment for years. Declan was awarded the commercial division's management contract, a 7-figure annual salary baked into the corporate structure, and a Miami penthouse Graham had purchased 4 years ago and visited twice. Fiona received the family's art collection, appraised at approximately $9 million, and a trust that would pay out for the next 20 years. Willa counted ceiling tiles and waited. And finally, Hartley said, turning to the last page of the document, "To my daughter, Willa Elaine Bancroft." He paused, just a half second, but she caught it. "For her years of principled independence, I leave the pocket watch belonging to her maternal grandfather, Raymond Elaine Kowalski, currently held in my safe deposit box at First Midwest Bank, branch 114. I leave her also my sincere apologies for whatever they are worth." The room went quiet in a specific way, the quiet of people trying very hard not to react while they react. Declan pressed his lips together. Fiona studied her manicure. Constance turned slowly to look at Willa for the first time since she'd walked in, and on her face was an expression of complete, satisfied composure. It was worse than a smirk. It was the look of someone who had already won and found the whole thing a little boring. Hartley reached into his breast pocket. He placed on the table a small object wrapped in a square of brown cloth. He slid it across to Willa. She unwrapped it. Inside was a pocket watch, gold-plated with a cracked crystal face and a winding stem sheared off at the base decades before she was born. The hands were frozen at 417. The back was engraved with her grandfather's initials, R.E.K. She had never met Raymond Kowalski. He had died before she was born. "That concludes the formal reading," Hartley said. A broken watch. Constance's voice was perfectly measured, pleasant almost. The tone she used with service staff she found disappointing. She glanced at Declan. "We should schedule the board transition meeting for Thursday, don't you think?" Declan was already on his phone. Willa wrapped the watch back in its cloth. Her hands were steady, which surprised her. The grief she'd been carrying for years had already done most of its work. She had mourned her father in pieces, incrementally, every Christmas spent alone and every school play he never attended. This was not grief. This was something colder and heavier, like a stone dropped into still water, and she held it in her chest, stood, and picked up her coat from the back of the chair. She was in the hallway before she registered that she was walking. The carpet was thick and burgundy. The sconces made everything look slightly jaundiced. She found the elevator bank, pressed the down button, and stood with her forehead nearly touching the cool metal door. The watch sat in her coat pocket. She could feel the weight of it. Miss Bancroft. She turned. Edmund Hartley was coming down the hall at a pace that, for a 67-year-old man, was remarkably purposeful. His tie was still perfectly knotted, but he had unbuttoned his collar's top button, and he was glancing back over his shoulder with an alertness that didn't match the composed man she'd watched in the conference room. "I have nothing to say to you, Mr. Hartley," Willa said. Her voice came out even. She was proud of that. "I know," he said, "but your father did." He stopped in front of her and lowered his voice below the hum of the ventilation system. "There is a secondary document. It was not part of the formal reading. It could not be." "Why not?" "Because the conference room has been compromised. The firm's internal network was accessed 8 months ago using Constance's login credentials. Your father discovered it 6 months after that, which gave him 4 months to work." He glanced toward the elevator. He did not waste them. The elevator arrived. The doors opened onto an empty car. Hartley stepped inside without another word, and after a moment, Willa followed. He pressed the button for the basement parking level. "Constance had been moving money," he said as the doors closed. "Small amounts at first, drawn from the property group's operating accounts through a shell company that Declan helped her structure. Over 4 years, it totaled somewhere north of $16 million. But that was almost secondary. Secondary to what?" Hartley's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Graham had a cardiologist, a Dr. Renata Ossi, whom he'd been seeing for what his primary care physician had diagnosed as an irregular heart rhythm and the early stages of cognitive decline. He was 69. It seemed plausible. He paused. Last year, on his own initiative, he consulted a second cardiologist at Northwestern without telling anyone, including Constance. That doctor ran a full toxicology panel. She found chronically elevated levels of digoxin in his bloodstream. The kind of levels you see in patients who have been administered the drug in small, regular doses over a sustained period, without a valid prescription. The elevator floor seemed to drop out from under her. Someone was poisoning him. Yes. Constance. "We believe so. Your father believed so. He didn't have enough to bring to prosecutors. The method was careful enough to maintain plausible deniability. Constance manages his household staff. She controls the pharmacy deliveries. Graham was afraid that if he moved publicly, her attorneys would have it dismissed, and she'd know he knew, and whatever came next would be worse." He looked at Willa directly for the first time. So he stopped fighting them in the light and started building in the dark. The elevator reached the parking garage. Hartley led her to a black Escalade idling near the stairwell. "The watch, Willa," he said. She pulled it from her pocket. He took it carefully, turned it over, and placed his thumbnail at the very base of the broken winding stem, pressing inward at a specific angle. There was a faint mechanical sound, a tiny latch releasing. The back panel swung open on a hinge invisible when closed. The interior had been hollowed out. Where the movement should have been, there was only a small cavity. Inside it, a folded square of paper and a flat metal key, old-fashioned, the kind that opened a deadbolt rather than a digital lock. "He told me," Hartley said quietly, "that the watch was the only thing of his he was certain Constance would never touch. It belonged to your mother's father. She wouldn't have known its significance, and she wouldn't have cared to find out." He handed it back to Willa. "Open the paper." The note was written in her father's handwriting. She recognized it from birthday cards she'd kept in a shoebox under her bed since she was 7. The letters were slightly less precise than she remembered, the tremor of an older hand, but the voice was unmistakably his. "Willa, if you're reading this, you took the watch and you didn't throw it at Hartley's head. Good. That's exactly what I needed you to do. I owe you more apologies than this paper can hold, so I'll give you the important one first. I pushed you away after your mother died because Constance asked me to, and I was weak enough to let her. I told myself I was protecting the business. I was protecting my own comfort. That is the truth, and I'm sorry. The truth about everything else. Constance and Declan have been stealing from me for 4 years. They have also been slowly killing me, though you should know I was already dying. The heart damage is real and was progressing on its own. They only accelerated the timeline. This matters because it means what I built for you. I built with time I had left, not time I expected to have. Over the past 3 years, I converted a significant portion of my private holdings, mineral lease income, foreign property sales, liquidated bearer instruments, into assets that exist entirely outside the property group's corporate structure. These assets are not on any balance sheet Constance has ever seen. They are registered to a holding company called Lakewind Trust. Lakewind Trust is registered in your name, as of 14 months ago. The key in this watch opens a safe deposit box at Midwest Heritage Bank in Galena, Illinois. Box 47. Hartley knows the way. Go see what I left you, then decide what to do with the rest. I love you. I should have said it more often and with less paperwork. Dad. Willa sat in the back seat of the Escalade for a long time after she finished reading, holding the note with both hands. Then she folded it carefully along its original creases and placed it back inside the hollowed watch. "How far is Galena?" she asked. "About 2.5 hours, Hartley said. I'll drive." They took I-90 west out of Chicago, through the flat industrial sprawl of the suburbs and into the rolling farm country of northwestern Illinois, where the highway narrowed and the sky opened up and the October light turned everything the color of old brass. Willa watched it all through the window and didn't speak much, and Hartley didn't press her. Somewhere past Rockford, she asked how long he had known about the poisoning, and he told her 14 months. And she asked why he hadn't gone to the police himself, and he gave her the answer she had expected. Graham had asked him not to. Graham had a plan. She asked if he believed in it. Hartley was quiet for a moment. "I believe Graham Bancroft was the most methodical person I ever worked with," he said. "When he set his mind to something, he was patient in a way most people aren't capable of. So yes, I believe in the plan." Galena was a small historic town tucked into the bluffs above the Galena River, full of 19th century storefronts and bed and breakfasts. Midwest Heritage Bank was on Main Street, a 2-story limestone building that had been a dry goods store in 1891, according to the plaque by the door. Inside, the bank manager, a compact and efficient woman named Louise Tran, had clearly been expecting them. She said nothing beyond what was necessary, led them to the vault room without ceremony, and left them alone with box 47. The key fit, the box slid out. Inside were 3 items: a USB drive, a sealed envelope, and a letter-sized document folded in thirds bearing the letterhead of a firm Willa didn't recognize, Meridian Asset Partners, LLC. Hartley opened his laptop on the table beside the box. The USB drive contained a single file, a video. When he played it, Willa's father appeared on the screen. Graham Bancroft had been a physically imposing man for most of his life, broad-shouldered, straight-backed, with the controlled bearing of someone who had built something from nothing and wanted you to know it without having to say so. The man on the screen was diminished. He sat in a leather chair she didn't recognize, in a room she'd never seen, wearing a sweater that was too large for him. But his eyes were still sharp. That had not changed. "Hi, Willa." His voice was rougher than she remembered. He cleared his throat. "I'm recording this in February. I don't know exactly how much time I have, so I'm going to be efficient." She almost laughed at that. He was dying and he was still being efficient. "The document in the box is a certification of holdings for Lakewind Trust, your trust. Over the past 3 years, I moved approximately $1.6 billion in private assets into that structure, physical real estate in 4 states held through clean title, a private timber portfolio in Oregon, 19 commercial parcels in secondary markets that Bancroft Property Group never touched, and cash-equivalent instruments totaling roughly $240 million held in accounts at institutions Constance has no knowledge of. Hartley has the full inventory. It's yours, free and clear, and it has been legally yours for over a year." He paused and folded his hands in his lap. "There's one more thing. The Bancroft Property Group. What Constance inherited today, what she and Declan have been running toward for 12 years, is not the asset she thinks it is. I spent the last 2 years quietly leveraging the company's commercial holdings against a private credit facility provided by Meridian Asset Partners. Constance's attorneys will find this out very soon. The grace period on that facility expires in 60 days. A small, tired smile crossed his face. "Meridian Asset Partners is a subsidiary of Lakewind Trust. You are Constance's primary creditor. When the group defaults, and it will default, because the cash reserves were already depleted by 4 years of embezzlement, and I accelerated that process in the last 18 months, you will have the legal right to call the loans, seize the collateral, and foreclose on the controlling interest." He leaned forward slightly. "The toxicology reports are on the drive. 2 independent analyses, one from Northwestern, one from a specialist in Boston. The financial forensics documenting the embezzlement are also there. Hartley commissioned them through an outside firm, and they are airtight. Take all of it to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division and to the Cook County DA's office. Not the Chicago PD, the FBI. Constance will have attorneys. Very good ones, but she won't have the resources to pay them after you call the loans, and the evidence is not ambiguous." The smile faded. What replaced it was something harder to look at. "I made a lot of mistakes, Willa. Most of them I made with you. I let a woman I barely understood convince me that the distance between us was your fault, because it was easier than admitting it was mine. You put yourself through school. You built a life. You became someone decent and good without any help from me, and I watched it from far away and told myself it meant you were fine." He stopped. Swallowed. "You were fine, but you shouldn't have had to be fine alone." Willa pressed 2 fingers against her mouth and stared at the screen. "I love you," he said. "I should have been louder about that a long time ago. I'm sorry I'm only saying it now, when I can't hear you say anything back." He reached toward the camera, and then the recording ended. The vault room was very quiet. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly. Somewhere in the main bank, a phone rang twice and stopped. Willa sat with her hands flat on the table. Then she picked up the USB drive, held it between her fingers, and looked at Hartley. "The FBI field office," she said. "Is it Chicago or Springfield for financial crimes?" "Chicago," Hartley said. "I already have a contact there." "Good." She stood. And I want a forensic accounting team independent of your firm reviewing the Meridian documents before we file anything. No procedural vulnerabilities. Hartley looked at her with an expression she would later recognize as the particular respect that certain men show women who refuse to be rattled. I have someone in mind, he said. She's very good. Then let's go. 53 days later, the conference room at Bancroft Property Group's corporate offices on Wacker Drive felt like a different room. The afternoon light was flat and grey. Someone had brought in a tray of coffee that sat untouched at the end of the table. The silence had a quality that had nothing to do with peace. Constance sat at the head of the table in a cream blazer that seemed to have lost its authority somewhere between her car and the elevator. Declan's signet ring clicked against the table in an irregular rhythm that stopped when he noticed Willa watching his hand. Fiona was not present. She had been advised by separate counsel not to attend. 2 attorneys from Constance's firm sat rigidly on one side of the table. Special Agent Dara Kessler of the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit sat on the other. Hartley stood near the door. Willa walked in. She wore a dark navy blazer over a white shirt. She had taken her hair down. She carried nothing except a slim folder and the kind of stillness that comes from having made a decision and stopped second-guessing it. She sat down at the opposite end of the table from Constance. The Meridian Credit Facility has been called, she said without preamble. As of this morning, Lakewine Trust has filed for emergency foreclosure on the pledged collateral, which includes the controlling interest in Bancroft Property Group's commercial division, the Winnetka property, the Miami penthouse, and the fund accounts attached to Declan's management contract. She opened the folder, though she didn't look at it. Additionally, the Cook County District Attorney's Office has formally accepted our referral. The FBI opened an independent investigation 11 days ago. Agent Kessler is here to notify you both that you are subjects of that investigation. This is a shakedown. Declan's voice was tight and controlled, which meant he was afraid. You can't just. You're a schoolteacher. You don't have the capital to call any. Lakewine Trust has $1.6 billion in verified assets, Willa said. Your attorneys can confirm that number. It's in the filing. Constance had not spoken. She was looking at Willa with an expression it took a moment to name. The expression of someone who had spent 12 years believing she was the most strategic person in any room she entered, and who had just discovered she was not. He set this up, Constance said. Her voice was flat, all of it, before he died. All of it, Willa agreed. The watch. Something crossed Constance's face, not quite regret, but the shadow of it. I thought it was sentimental. I didn't think. No, Willa said, you didn't. Constance's attorney put a hand on her arm and leaned in to speak quietly. She shook him off. What do you want? She asked. Willa leaned back in her chair. She thought about her father in that too large sweater, recording a message in a room she'd never seen, doing the only thing he had the energy left to do well. She thought about the 4th graders she'd be returning to in January, about the student in the 3rd row who had started reading chapter books on her own 2 weeks ago after a year of struggling. She thought about the drive back from Galena in the October dark, Hartley quiet beside her, the pocket watch in her coat pocket, and the strange, clarifying feeling of knowing exactly what came next. I don't want anything from you personally, Willa said. The law wants things from you. That's between you and Agent Kessler. She stood. The employees of the property group will be transitioned to new management over the next 60 days. Their pensions are protected under the Lakewine restructuring agreement. That was important to my father, so it's important to me. She reached into the pocket of her blazer. She placed on the table at Constance's end the broken pocket watch, gold-plated, cracked face, hands frozen at 4:17. My grandfather's, she said. It doesn't run. But my father kept it safe for 30 years, so it must have been worth something. She buttoned her blazer. You're going to want a good criminal attorney, Constance. I'd start making calls. She left the folder on the table. She nodded to Agent Kessler. She walked to the door, where Hartley stepped aside to let her through, and she took the elevator down to the lobby and walked out onto Wacker Drive into the cold November air. The lake wind hit her immediately, the same wind that had been tearing through the city the morning this all started, 6 weeks and a lifetime ago. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment with her face turned into it. She had a school to get back to. She had a trust to restructure and a charitable foundation to build, and several hundred employees whose retirement security was now, in a meaningful way, her responsibility. She had a lot of phone calls to make, and a lot of work ahead, and a father she would spend the rest of her life mourning properly, which was something she hadn't been able to do until now. She pulled out her phone and called the school to confirm her return date. Behind her, in the tower above, something that had been a long time coming was finally, irreversibly over. Now, what would you have done if you'd been handed that broken watch? Would you have walked out and never looked back? Or would you have pressed the stem and found out what was inside? Drop your answer in the comments. If this story hit you the way it hit us, share it with someone who deserves a little justice today, and subscribe to Own the Drama, because we're just getting started.